Hello and welcome to the program. Popular TV personality Volodymyr Zelenski has accepted the concession made by Ukraine's incumbent president Petro Poroshenko and is now set to become Ukraine's next leader. According to exit poll results, he has secured more than 73%, while Poroshenko received some 24% of the vote. Joining us to discuss the outcome is Oleksiy Haran, research director at the Democratic Initiatives Foundation and professor of political science at the Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you for the invitation.
So, a lot has happened. Ukraine is certainly in a very interesting time at the moment. What did you make of the results?
Oh, a lot of things. So we can talk for quite a lot of time. Basically, democracy works, and we know that democracy is procedure. So in this sense, elections were very democratic. And despite predictions about administrative resource and falsifications, that Ukraine will not be able to conduct fair and free elections, vice versa, elections which are very, very open. I will give you an example for the foreign audience. You know that in post-Soviet spaces, in post-Soviet countries, usually the voters at the hospitals, when you have polling station at the hospital, prison, or in the army, they vote for authorities, okay? Because there is a pressure, administrative pressure. And now, when we analyze results of the first round and the runoff, it's not the case. So the votes were split, so which means there were no administrative pressure even in these places, which are traditional places in post-Soviet states for falsifications and manipulations. So in this sense, we again demonstrate, so we are demonstrating again and again that we have democratic elections. The specifics and
do you feel that there can't really be a pattern of seen throughout the whole election, which region and which category, and what was the age group of those who voted, say, in favor of the incumbent president and Zelensky?
Okay, actually, this is a very good question, because there was no regional polarization of the country. Because previously, during some elections, like very dramatic elections of 2004, which led to the Orange Revolution against falsifications, or 2010, when half-criminal President Yanukovych was elected, the country was very polarized.
Right. So just on screen now, we have the two candidates, Volodymyr Zelenski and the incumbent Petro Poroshenko, and so Zelensky leading with 73% and Petro Poroshenko 25.5%.
Yes.
So that's a fairly decent margin.
Yes, but let me finish. So
no,
in 2000,
just to come back, we can come back to that point that you were just making. Do you think the margin between the two candidates is too great, and it has never been seen before in the modern Ukrainian politics?
No. But there is explanation for that. But let me finish with my previous point. So since 2014, we do not have regional polarization of Ukraine. Both elections of 2014, when Poroshenko won throughout the whole country, and now when Zelensky won actually support in all the country, this is very important, because it means that Russian tactics, divide and rule, it doesn't work anymore in Ukraine. And since 2014, actually after Russian aggression, we see the formation of Ukrainian political nation, which includes Russian speakers, as Mr. Zelensky, which includes all other ethnic groups like Mr. Zelensky, who is ethnic Jew. So very interesting situation. We have ethnic Jew as president and as prime minister. So this is very demonstrating that Ukrainian political nation is very, very inclusive.
I think
notion.
Especially it goes against any sort of propaganda that the Kremlin tried to spew in 2014, 2015, showing Ukraine as this anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish environment, when in reality now, you know, Israel would be the only other country that has a prime minister and a president who are both Jewish.
Correct. And your question was also about the difference.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, let me explain it. So Poroshenko had to do Poroshenko led the country since 2014 through the years of war, very difficult economic situation, and he had to conduct necessary but unpopular economic reforms. And to do that, when you have democracy, when all the channels have possibility to criticize the government, and to do it on the eve of elections, that's very difficult for any politician. You know, even in the West, usually politicians do not conduct and do not do unpopular things on the eve of elections. And Poroshenko had to conduct many things, including reforms in medical sphere, pension sphere, education reform, health reform, and you know, the results we'll see later. But now people are quite frustrated that they do not see the results, and it was also these feelings, they were also stimulated by first debates with opposition. I mean, we had very different kind of opposition from left to the right, from nationalist to pro-Russian. Everybody was criticizing the government. There was a lot of populism. And in this situation, actually, it's appeared that people are distrusting all the politicians, whom they consider to be old politicians, old guard. And they are distrusting both authorities and opposition. And suddenly you have a new guy who is saying, I'm totally new. And you have this, you know, that he played into the movie, he played the role of honest president, so people believed he could be the real honest president. But here I see the problem. I see,
but before you get into it, do you think that if it was any other political novice who had thrown his hat into the ring, for example, there was a lot of talk before the first round of elections and before all the candidates announced that they would be running, Ukrainian pop singer Sviatoslav Vakarchuk. A lot of people thought that he was going to run.
Right.
Now, do you reckon that he would have as much support, and do you think he would have done as well, also having no political background?
Well, he had at the beginning he had quite a lot of support in the ratings. The difference maybe with Zelensky actually is that Vakarchuk wasn't supported by media magnate, by oligarch Kolomoisky. The second point, actually, Vakarchuk was much more prepared, I think, for the role of president, because he was a public figure. He was active in civic life in Ukraine. But, you know, he was hesitating and basically he lost the momentum. And then you had the Zelensky, who embraced actually all the populist moods. Again, his electorate is very, very different, because in the second round there were pro-Russian voters of Mr. Boyko who voted for Zelensky, and there was nationalist Western Ukraine which also voted for Zelensky. So it's very broad
a broad spectrum of people.
A broad spectrum,
sure.
And it would be really difficult, you know, to satisfy everybody.
Well, he has managed to satisfy a lot of people, it seems, without really talking about any of his policy, without providing any sort of concrete solutions or roadmaps to any of the major issues, such as the war in the East and fighting corruption. Only today, some more information has come out with Dmytro Razumkov. He worked for Volodymyr Zelenski, and he has named the first bill that the team will be working on. So there's law on democracy, extension of the rules of direct democracy, removal of MPs and presidential immunity, and impeachment law. So out of those few, I can see impeachment law. This was definitely discussed. Even during the election campaign, and removing immunity from members of parliament.
Look, removing immunity is an old thing, and actually there are the drafts, the bills which are in the parliament, which were submitted to the parliament, including by incumbent Poroshenko. So there's nothing new about that, but deputies didn't support it. So the problem is not only about presidents, the problem is also about the parliament. Regarding the direct democracy, or how it's called?
Yes, so extension of the rules of direct democracy.
Okay, yeah, in his program he was talking about referendums, but we know that referendums could be turned into kind of very populist and anti-democratic mechanisms. So experts know about this suggestion, and we were quite skeptical about what does it mean. You know, now definitely his political technologies are very smart, as we saw during campaign, and definitely they will do things now to increase his popularity, to show that he's ready to do something, because they need to do it on the eve of parliamentary elections in Ukraine, which we have in fall. And again, we need to understand that Ukrainian president is not all-powerful like in Russia, okay? We have the European system where the government is responsible, the cabinet is responsible to the parliament, and president cannot dismiss or appoint prime minister. So this is a system of cohabitation. But what the problem I see with Zelensky is definitely the inexperience of his team, especially in the sphere of foreign policy and security policy. And this may be used by Putin. You know, definitely Putin will be testing Zelensky regarding situation in Donbass, in the Azov Sea. It's very important that Zelensky mentions several times, it's in his programs, that Donbass is Ukrainian, that he doesn't recognize annexation of Crimea. But we know that the whole art of negotiations is a difficult thing. So the question how he will behave in Normandy format, right?
Right. So he's actually trying. Well, he has mentioned including the UK and the US in the Normandy negotiations with France and Germany. An interesting thing you mentioned was that, you know, Moscow could potentially use Zelensky to their advantage. That
they will try to do that.
Attempt to use him. That's right. So. But if we look at the West, for example, in the U.S. after the election of Donald Trump, the current the U.S. president, there was a lot of celebration in Moscow because they thought that he would somehow change the policy towards Russia. But so far, we've seen that actually Trump has been a major disappointment for Moscow because the policy towards Russia hasn't changed. Washington hasn't changed its direction.
The sanctions were increased. Yeah.
Sanctions were increased and pressure continues to mount. So Zelensky could, in a way, be the same. Could be the same thing. You know, Zelensky could also foil, you know, Russian narratives. They have so much expectation for him, but in reality, it could be completely different. And I think that's often overlooked. Would you agree with that?
I agree with that. You know, it was important for Moscow first that Poroshenko would be defeated from symbolic point of view, and Putin openly stated that he is going to have negotiations with any Ukrainian president, with exception of Poroshenko, and that's understandable. But Putin will try to use the inexperience of Zelensky team. So here we should be very, very careful. And I think the geopolitical moods in Ukraine, they changed since 2014, and it would be really difficult, you know, to turn Ukraine back to Russian sphere of influence. That's impossible.
I think a lot of Western leaders are also watching out for this, you know, and diplomats as well. Everybody's watching to make sure that there's no turn back towards, you know, the old ways.
I think actually the reaction of international leaders, it shows that they would like to engage Zelensky into dialogue with the West as soon as possible, and in a certain way to educate him, to demonstrate support for Ukraine. So I think that's important. They did, by the way, the West did it in 1994 when President Kuchma was elected. He was also not very experienced in foreign politics, and I believe it was successful. In 2010, the West tried to engage Yanukovych. And at the beginning, it seemed that it's working, yeah, because Yanukovych, he was continuing negotiations on free trade agreement with the European Union, but at the end of the day, it failed, right? So there were successful engagements, there were failures. But now what we can see from reaction of international leaders, they are trying to engage Zelensky.
That's a very important point. Now, last question. Do you think people in Russia will start looking more towards Ukraine? And acting or perhaps reacting to the fact that anything is possible, really. Like Zelensky said, that newcomers to the political specter could lead in polls.
Okay, why Zelensky? Well, here I would be quite cautious about this phrase and about forecast what may happen in post-Soviet space. Why Zelensky could win elections? Because we have democracy, because we have media, because which is not controlled by the state, because we all have possibility to criticize the government everywhere, and actually Ukrainians enjoyed criticizing the government everywhere. So can you imagine this situation in Russia at this point?
I don't know. I don't know. We would have to see it, I guess.
Now, definitely not. So it means that if you see the opposition in Russia, like Navalny, he was simply prevented from participating in elections. And vice versa, the state television can actually provide help to Putin regarding operations of successor, appointing successor to Putin. What happened when Putin was appointed as successor to Yeltsin? And Putin appeared on TV, strong, young, and he was immediately elected. Basically, he wasn't known, but they played the role, the state television. So in Russia, situation is totally different. Again, what happened in Ukraine is demonstrates both advantages and disadvantages of democracy. Actually, because on the one hand, yes, it seems like everything is possible. On the other hand, we didn't have real debates and we do not know much about the specifics of the views of the new president and his team.
Right. Well, that's something to watch out for in the coming weeks. He's set to publish more of his goals and more of his roadmaps for different issues. Thank you very much for coming into the studio to speak with us today. That was Oleksiy Haran, professor of political science at Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. You're watching UATV.